Minjun stood at the observation deck of the mining station, looking out at the endless darkness of space. His hands were tired and worn, marked by years of hard work under the control of the Galactic Coalition. The station orbited a planet called Kepler 9, far from Earth, far from the places where humans had once lived freely. Around him, thousands of human workers moved like machines, doing the jobs that no other species in the Coalition wanted to do. They mined rare minerals, processed dangerous materials, and built weapons that would never protect their own kind. It was a life of endless servitude, and Minjun was one of the few who remembered when things could have been different. The Galactic Coalition had found Earth 300 years ago. At first, the aliens came with promises of peace and advancement. They offered technology, knowledge, and a place in a great community of intelligent species. But those promises were lies. One by one, the Coalition slowly changed the rules. Humans were forced to give up their independence. They were moved to work colonies across the galaxy. Their children were trained for labor, not leadership. Their voices were not heard in any decision that mattered. Over 3 centuries, humanity had become nothing more than a slave workforce, and most humans had forgotten that things were ever different. Dr. Heywan worked in the research division of the mining station. She was a brilliant scientist, one of the few humans the Coalition allowed to do real intellectual work. Even so, her research had to serve Coalition purposes. She studied ways to make humans work harder, faster, and longer without complaint. She studied ways to make them obey commands without question. It was work that made her feel sick every day, but she had no choice. The Coalition controlled everything, including the air humans breathed on the stations. One day, Minjun received a secret message from Haiwan. It was dangerous to send messages outside official channels. But Haiwan had discovered something that changed everything. She had found old human records, hidden in the deepest parts of the station's computer systems. These records spoke of ancient technology, something from the earliest days of human space exploration. It was a weapon, or perhaps something more than a weapon. It was a way to unlock abilities that had been built into human DNA thousands of years ago, abilities that the Coalition had discovered and deliberately suppressed. When humans were first discovered by the Coalition, the alien leaders had done something terrible. They realized that humans had genetic potential far greater than they had shown. Their minds could develop in ways that made them dangerous, so the Coalition had altered human genetics, locking away abilities that might have made humans too powerful to control. For 3 centuries, humans had lived as a limited version of what they could be, never knowing what had been taken from them. Minjun read Haiwan's message 3 times before destroying it. His heart raced. If this was true, it meant everything could change. But it also meant danger. The Coalition would never allow humans to access this knowledge. If they found out that Haiwan had discovered the truth, they would remove her, erase her research, and punish the entire station as a warning to others. That night, Minjun made a choice that would change the galaxy forever. He decided that humanity would no longer wait for permission to be free. He decided that they would take back what had been taken from them, no matter the cost. The next day, the news came through Coalition channels. A threat had appeared at the edge of Coalition space. Something ancient and powerful was moving toward them, something that the records called the void entities. These creatures existed in the spaces between stars, feeding on the energy of civilizations. They had been dormant for millions of years, but now they were waking up. The Coalition was afraid. For the first time in recorded history, the great powers realized they might not be strong enough to survive alone. The Coalition's response was immediate and cold. They demanded that humanity send its entire fleet to the front lines. They needed cannon fodder, soldiers who could die first and buy time for the real fighting forces. The Coalition generals did not care if humans lived or died. In fact, they preferred humans to die. It was easier to replace a human soldier than to lose one of their own people. Min Jun listened to the Coalition's demands, and he understood the truth. The Coalition had kept humans weak for a reason. The weak could be controlled. The weak could be used. The weak would never challenge authority. But now, facing the void entities, the Coalition had revealed their deepest fear. They knew that humans had potential. They knew that humans, if they were truly unleashed, could become something magnificent and terrible. And that was exactly what Min Jun planned to happen. He contacted Haiwan through hidden channels. She had already begun preparing. In secret locations across the outer colonies, other human scientists and engineers were working on the same project. They were preparing to activate something that had been forbidden for 300 years. They were preparing to awaken the true potential of humanity. Haiwan told Min Jun that the process would take time. The awakening protocol, as they called it, would need to be distributed to every human who could receive it. The transformation would not be easy. Some humans might not survive it. Some might reject what they were becoming. But those who accepted the change would become something new. They would no longer be limited by the genetic blocks the Coalition had placed upon them. They would be able to access parts of their minds and bodies that had been locked away for thousands of years. They would develop abilities that seemed like magic to those who did not understand the science behind them. As the void entities moved closer to Coalition space, Min Jun prepared his people. The Coalition still believed they controlled humanity. The Coalition still believed that humans would follow orders and die on command. But Min Jun and Haiwan and thousands of other humans knew the truth. Humanity had been asleep for 300 years. Now they were waking up. And when they were fully awake, when the awakening protocol had transformed them into what they could truly be, the galaxy would never be the same again. The debt that humanity owed to the Coalition, the debt of servitude and obedience and suffering, was about to be paid in a way that nobody expected. The Coalition had kept humanity as their slave, thinking that slaves could never become dangerous. But they had miscalculated. They had miscalculated badly. And in the darkness of space, as the void entities approached and the Coalition prepared for battle, humanity prepared for something else entirely. They prepared to become free. The research facility was hidden deep inside an asteroid, far away from Coalition patrols and monitoring systems. Haiwan moved through the dark corridors, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Around her, hundreds of human scientists and engineers worked without sleep, preparing something that had never been attempted before. They were preparing to unlock the human genome, to restore the abilities that had been stolen from their species 300 years ago. Jiho was one of the youngest scientists in the facility. She had been born on the mining stations and had never known freedom. Her entire life had been controlled by the Coalition, her education directed toward their purposes, her future decided by people who saw her as nothing more than a tool. But now, working with Haiwan, she felt something change inside her. She felt purpose. She felt the possibility of something greater than slavery. The work was incredibly complex. The awakening protocol was not a simple vaccine or medicine that could be injected into people. It was something far more sophisticated. It was a carefully designed sequence of genetic information that would rewrite parts of human DNA. It would remove the blocks that had been placed there by the Coalition. It would open pathways in the human brain that had been closed for 300 years. It would connect human consciousness to the quantum field itself, allowing humans to perceive and manipulate reality in ways that seemed impossible. Sujin was an engineer who worked on the delivery system. The protocol could not be given to people all at once. The human body needed time to adapt to the changes. The transformation would happen in stages, over weeks and months. First, the physical body would change. Humans would become stronger, faster, and more resilient. Their senses would sharpen. They would be able to see further into the light spectrum. They would hear frequencies that other species could not even detect. But the real changes would happen in the mind. human consciousness would evolve. People would develop what other species called telepathy, but it was not really telepathy in the way that word usually meant. It was quantum perception. Awakened humans would be able to sense the quantum field that connected all matter in the universe. They would understand the fundamental nature of reality. They would be able to influence that field, to bend it, to reshape it. What would look like magic to the untrained eye would actually be advanced physics that only humans would be able to instinctively understand and use. HFY gathered the team together to explain the risks. Many people might die during the transformation. Some bodies might reject the protocol. Some minds might not be able to handle the expansion of consciousness. The process would be painful. It would require sacrifice. But the alternative was clear. If they did nothing, the void entities would destroy the coalition. And then, with the coalition gone and no other power to control them, the void entities would turn their hunger toward human worlds. Humanity would be destroyed completely. Minjun arrived at the facility with volunteers from across the human colonies. Thousands of people had agreed to receive the protocol. Some of them were soldiers and warriors, people who wanted to fight, but many of them were ordinary people who simply wanted to be free. They wanted to know what it felt like to use their minds and bodies to their full potential. They wanted to understand the universe instead of just surviving in it. The first test group was prepared. 50 people lay in special chambers filled with a substance that would help their bodies process the genetic changes. The chambers would keep their vital signs stable as their DNA rewrote itself. HFY stood at the control station, her hands shaking slightly as she initiated the protocol. The transformation began. Inside the chambers, people's bodies began to glow with a soft blue light. Their breathing changed. Their hearts beat faster, then slower, then found a new rhythm. Hours passed. Some people opened their eyes and seemed confused, as if they were waking from a dream. Others remained unconscious, their minds processing the vast amount of new information that was flooding into their consciousness. When the first person woke up fully, they gasped. They could sense things they had never been able to sense before. They could feel the electrical currents in the chamber. They could sense the emotions of the people standing around them. They could perceive the quantum field that connected everything, a web of energy that touched every molecule in existence. It was overwhelming at first, terrifying, but then it became beautiful. They had been blind their entire lives, and now they could finally see. By the end of the first week, 43 of the 50 had successfully transformed. 7 had not survived the process. It was a devastating loss, but HFY knew it was necessary. You could not unlock such power without paying a price. The coalition had kept humans limited because they understood that true freedom was dangerous. It could not be given safely. It could only be taken by those brave enough to endure the transformation. Sujin worked with the survivors to help them learn how to control their new abilities. The most important lesson was that expanded power required expanded responsibility. These awakened humans could do tremendous damage if they were not careful. They could hurt people without meaning to. They could destabilize the quantum field if they used their abilities recklessly. They had to learn discipline. They had to learn respect for the forces they were now controlling. Minjun understood something that many others did not. The true weapon was not the abilities themselves. The true weapon was knowledge. Awakened humans would understand the universe in ways that other species did not. They would see connections that others missed. They would be able to develop technologies that seemed like magic. They would be able to work together in ways that other species could not, because they could share consciousness on a quantum level. More people came to the facility. Word spread through hidden human networks that the transformation was possible, that they could become something greater than slaves. Thousands of people traveled to secret locations to receive the protocol. The awakening was slow but unstoppable. Within months, Tens of thousands of humans had been transformed. Within a year, millions were undergoing the process. The coalition had no idea what was happening. They were still focused on the approaching void entities, still demanding that humans send more soldiers to fight and die in the coalition's wars. But humanity was no longer preparing to fight the coalition's battles. They were preparing to fight for themselves. And when the moment came, when the void entities finally arrived and the coalition desperately called for human fleets to defend them, humanity would have a choice. They could continue to be slaves, or they could finally settle the debt that the coalition owed them, and the galaxy would tremble at the answer they chose. The void entities arrived without warning. One moment, the outer sensors of coalition space showed nothing but empty darkness. The next moment, ships were exploding. The creatures moved through space like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They were not ships. They were living things, ancient beings that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that normal sensors could barely detect. They consumed energy like hungry monsters, draining the power from ships and stations, leaving only empty husks floating in the void. The coalition's military command center was in chaos. General Vex Tora of the Krell species screamed orders that nobody could follow. The void entities were destroying their fleets faster than anyone could respond. The great ships of the coalition, massive weapons platforms that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years, were being torn apart like paper. Thousands of soldiers were dying every minute, and the void entities kept coming. The coalition sent an emergency broadcast to all human fleets and stations. The message was clear and urgent. All human military forces were to immediately move to the front lines and engage the void entities. This was presented as an honor, a chance for humans to prove their loyalty and their courage. But everyone knew the truth. They were being sent to die. They were being sent to buy time for the real coalition military to retreat to safer positions. Captain Min Jun received the order on his ship, the human carrier that had been designated as the flagship for the human forces. He stared at the message for a long moment. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the moment when everything would change. He opened a communication channel to all human forces across coalition space. His message was not the response the coalition expected. "This is Captain Min Jun," he said, his voice clear and calm. "I am transmitting new orders to all human personnel. You are no longer serving the Galactic Coalition. You are no longer following coalition commands. From this moment forward, humanity fights for humanity. We are no longer slaves. We are no longer tools. We are no longer expendable. Repeat after me. We are free." There was a moment of complete silence. The coalition commanders watched in disbelief as the human fleets began to move, not toward the void entities, but toward new positions that made no sense according to coalition strategy. They were forming a defensive perimeter, but not to protect coalition worlds. They were preparing to protect human worlds and human colonies. Then something amazing happened. The awakened humans, those who had received the protocol, began to coordinate in a way that the coalition had never seen before. They could sense each other's positions and intentions through quantum perception. They could communicate without speaking, without any radio signals or electronic devices. They moved like one organism with thousands of parts, each part aware of every other part. It was beautiful and terrifying. Young Jae was an officer who had been transformed by the protocol just months before. She stood on the bridge of her ship and she could sense everything. She could see the quantum field that the void entities moved through. She could understand their patterns, their hunger, their ancient intelligence. The creatures were powerful, but they were also predictable. They operated according to the same quantum rules that governed all existence. And now, humans could see those rules and use them. Young Jae transmitted tactical information to all human ships, not through radio or computers, through direct quantum communication. Every awakened human could see what she saw, could understand what she understood. It was like having an army of clones, except each one was independent and creative. Each one could improve on the strategy, could adapt to new situations, could work together perfectly without the delays and miscommunications that plagued other species. When the human fleets engaged the void entities, the coalition commanders watching from their safe positions could not believe what they were seeing. The humans were not just fighting the creatures. They were playing with them. They were learning from them, adapting to them, defeating them. Ships that should have been destroyed were using quantum techniques to reinforce their shields. Weapons that should have been useless were being modified on the fly to be deadly. Humans were actually healing themselves and their ships through quantum manipulation, accelerating repair processes that should have taken weeks into seconds. Nari was a strategic genius who had been given command of the overall human war effort. She saw something that even Min Jun had not fully predicted. The void entities were not just coming to attack the coalition. They were coming to consume an entire section of the galaxy. They were moving toward the human colonies, drawn by the energy signatures that the awakened humans were producing. The humans had made themselves bright targets. But Nari turned this into an advantage. She led the void entities into prepared positions where human fleets could attack them from multiple directions. The creatures, for the first time in millions of years, found themselves in tactical danger. They tried to adapt, but they could not move fast enough. Humans could predict their movements because humans could see the quantum field. The void entities were like blind creatures stumbling through darkness while humans could see everything. The coalition watched as their enemy became human salvation. The very creatures that were supposed to conquer the galaxy were being systematically destroyed by the species they had enslaved. The very soldiers they had sent to die were the ones winning the battle. It was a complete inversion of everything the coalition had believed about power and hierarchy. Min Jun understood that this moment was temporary. The void entities would be pushed back. The immediate threat would be contained. But the real change had already happened. The coalition could see that humans were no longer inferior. The coalition could see that humans were now superior. The question was not whether humanity would dominate. The question was whether the coalition would accept this new reality or whether there would be war. As the last void entity retreated and human forces regrouped, Min Jun made another broadcast. This time it reached not just human forces but every species in the coalition. His message was simple. The age of human slavery was over. Humanity would no longer follow coalition orders. Humanity would no longer be controlled or limited. And if the coalition tried to stop them, they would discover that the creatures they had feared were nothing compared to the species they had created when they tried to make humans into slaves. The coalition headquarters was located on a massive space station that orbited the planet Kael. This station was considered the center of power in the known galaxy. For thousands of years, the great leaders of 100 different species had made decisions here that shaped the fates of trillions of people. Now, for the first time in its history, the station was surrounded by human ships. Not attacking, not threatening, just waiting, just watching. Heywan stood in the observation room and looked at the data streaming in from all around the galaxy. The void entities were contained. Thousands of human soldiers had died during the battle, but the creatures had been pushed back beyond the outer reaches of coalition space. The immediate crisis was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. Min Jun entered the room and stood beside her. He looked tired. The transformation, even for awakened humans, required energy. Fighting and winning battles required sacrifice, but his eyes were clear and determined. He had led humanity from slavery to power. Now he had to lead them through what came next. "They want to negotiate," Heywan said, showing him the message from coalition leaders. "They want to make a deal. In exchange for humanity's continued military support, they will grant human representation in the Coalition Council. They will give us our own planetary systems. They will remove many of the old restrictions. Min Jun read the message carefully. It was insulting in its way. The coalition was offering humanity scraps, treats for a good dog. They thought they still had power, still had leverage. They did not understand that everything had changed. They did not understand that humanity no longer needed anything the coalition could give them. He walked to the communication center and sent a message to the coalition High Council. His words were clear and simple. Humanity would accept a meeting, but not to negotiate, to present demands. The terms were non-negotiable, and they would be presented by humans who could not be ignored. The Coalition Council chamber was designed to intimidate. The ceiling was hundreds of meters high. The room was filled with holographic displays, showing the power and wealth of the coalition. The great leaders of the major species sat on platforms raised above the floor. It was a room designed to make anyone who entered feel small and powerless. Ji Woo was the diplomat that Min Jun had chosen to deliver humanity's message. She was brilliant and composed, and she had been trained in all the old rules of coalition diplomacy. But she was also awakened. She could sense the fear in the room. She could perceive the quantum fear patterns in the minds of every species present. They were terrified. They had never faced a challenge like this before. They did not know how to respond when someone refused to play by the old rules. Ji Woo stood in the center of the chamber and she spoke. Her voice did not echo through the room because she did not need it to. Every being present could hear her clearly. Every being present could sense what she was saying on a level far deeper than mere words. The Galactic Coalition has enslaved humanity for 300 years, Ji Woo said. You have stolen our resources. You have stolen our potential. You have treated us as inferior because we let you. But that time is over. Humanity demands the following. First, complete independence. We will have our own worlds, our own systems, our own sovereignty. We will make our own decisions without coalition interference. Second, reparations. For 300 years of slavery, the coalition will transfer technologies, resources, and wealth to human worlds. This will continue for 100 years. Third, the dissolution of the old power structure. The coalition as it exists will cease to function. A new system will be created where all species have equal power. All species will vote on decisions. No species will have authority over another. The coalition leaders protested. They said this was impossible. They said humans did not have the right to make such demands. They said the coalition would not accept these conditions. Do-Yun stepped forward. She was a military strategist, and she was also awakened. Behind her, visible on every screen in the chamber, was footage of human capabilities. Humans repairing their ships through quantum manipulation. Humans moving faster than coalition sensors could track. Humans wielding weapons that should not exist according to coalition physics. The message was clear. Humanity had power, real power, not the fake power of old treaties or old agreements. The power to destroy the coalition if they chose to. Ji Woo spoke again. You have two choices. You can accept our demands and rebuild your civilization on a foundation of equality and justice. Or you can reject our demands. And we will take what we need, by force if necessary. The void entities are contained, but they will always be a threat. Humanity is strong enough to face them. Are you? The coalition leaders looked at each other. They began to understand something that humans had always known. When someone is backed into a corner, when they have no other choice, they change. They adapt. Or they die. One by one, the coalition worlds agreed to the terms. Some did it quickly, understanding the reality of the situation. Others resisted at first, but when they saw human ships moving toward their worlds, they also agreed. There was no violence. There was no need for violence. The coalition simply understood that the age of their domination was over. Within weeks, the restructuring of galactic society had begun. Ancient treaties were dissolved. New constitutions were written. Coalition wealth was being transferred to human worlds, and humanity was taking its place as an equal among the stars, not as an inferior species begging for crumbs. But Min Jun and Hai Wan both knew that the real test was not yet over. The real test would be whether humanity could hold this power without becoming the oppressors themselves. The real test would be whether humans could learn from history or whether they would repeat it. The debt had been paid. The galaxy had trembled at the force of human will. But now the hard part would begin. Now, humanity would have to prove that they deserved the power they had taken. 3 years had passed since the day when humanity had demanded equality from the Galactic Coalition. 3 years since the galaxy had trembled at the possibility of human domination. In that time, the galaxy had transformed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The old coalition was gone. In its place was something new, something that had never existed before. For the first time in galactic history, all species had equal power. Min Jun walked through the halls of the new Galactic Council building. It was a beautiful structure, built jointly by thousands of different species. It represented cooperation instead of domination. Every species had contributed to its design. Every species had a voice in its governance. The corridors were filled with aliens of every imaginable type. Some had many eyes. Some had no eyes at all. Some communicated through color changes, some through vibrations. And humans, moving among them, learning from them, teaching them. Min Jun had been elected as the first overseer of peacekeeping. It was a position of responsibility, but not absolute power. Every decision he made had to be approved by the council. Every law had to be voted on by representatives from all species. It was not a position that would have interested him before the transformation. But now, as an awakened human who could understand the quantum connections between all beings, it felt right. He could sense the hopes and fears of other species. He could understand their perspectives. He could help them find solutions that worked for everyone. Hai Wan had taken a different path. She had founded the Institute of Genetic Ethics, an organization dedicated to ensuring that no species would ever be artificially limited again. She had discovered that the coalition had been doing what they did to humans, to dozens of other species as well. Species that could have been great had been deliberately weakened by genetic manipulation. Species that could have lived in harmony had been turned into servants. Hai Wan worked with scientists from 100 different species to reverse the genetic locks that had been placed on them. It was delicate work. Unlocking potential had to be done carefully, with the full consent of the people involved. Some species chose to remain as they were. Some eagerly accepted the transformation, but all of them now had a choice, and that choice, that freedom to decide what they wanted to be, was revolutionary. Sujin and Jiho had become partners in a new technology company. They worked on developing technologies that benefited all species equally. They had created new forms of power that did not require draining the resources of planets. They had developed medical technologies that could heal injuries that had previously been permanent. They had created new forms of communication that allowed any species to instantly understand any other species, regardless of their physical form or their evolutionary origin. Youngjae had become a teacher. She trained young awakened humans in the proper use of their quantum abilities, but she also trained young members of other species who had undergone their own awakenings. The classroom was filled with beings of incredible diversity, all learning to understand the quantum field that connected them. It was a kind of education that could never have happened in the old coalition. It was based on cooperation and mutual understanding instead of hierarchy and control. But not everything was perfect. Nari, the strategic genius who had helped win the war against the void entities, saw problems that others did not. She sat in the council chambers and listened to the debates about how galactic resources should be distributed. Some human factions wanted to take advantage of their strength to gain more than their fair share. Some other species wanted to use democracy as a weapon, trying to outvote humans on every issue. The balance was fragile. One day, Nari brought her concerns to Min Jun. She showed him data that demonstrated a troubling pattern. In some regions of the galaxy, human administrators were making decisions that favored human colonies over others. In other regions, alliances of other species were blocking human interests out of fear. The dream of equality was becoming corrupted by the same old patterns of exploitation and dominance. "This is what we were afraid of," Nari said. "We fought to be free of oppression. But freedom requires constant work. It requires choosing to be just, even when we have the power to be unjust. Not all humans are making that choice." Min Jun listened carefully. He could sense the truth in her words through quantum perception. He could feel the conflict in the galactic psyche, the tension between the old patterns and the new possibilities. He realized something important. The transformation of society could not happen through force. It could only happen through education and example. He made a decision. Humanity would withdraw from direct political power. Human representatives would still sit in the council, would still have their vote. But humans would no longer seek leadership positions. Instead, humans would serve as advisors, helpers, and teachers. They would show other species what it meant to have power and choose not to use it for domination. It was a radical idea. Some humans disagreed with it. Some wanted to consolidate the power they had gained. Some wanted to become the new rulers of the galaxy, just as they had been oppressed before. But Min Jun had learned something that the old coalition had never understood. True power comes not from force, but from wisdom. True strength comes not from domination, but from the ability to restrain yourself. The decision was made. Humanity began the process of restructuring their role in galactic society. They established themselves as a species dedicated to cooperation, justice, and the elevation of all sentient beings. They shared their genetic knowledge freely with other species. They contributed their technology without expecting dominance in return. They used their quantum abilities not to control, but to understand and help. Over the following years, something remarkable happened. Other species began to follow humanity's example. The Krell, who had been among the most oppressive members of the coalition, began to share their own advanced technologies. The Z-Corps, who had been enslaved alongside humans, began to grow into a powerful new civilization. The Vextal, ancient enemies of humanity, began to work in genuine cooperation rather than merely pretending to do so. The galaxy was healing. It was a slow process. It would take centuries to fully undo the damage that the coalition had caused, but it was happening. And it was happening because humans had learned something crucial. They had learned that the real victory was not in taking power. The real victory was in choosing to use power wisely. The real victory was in transforming not just themselves, but the entire galactic community through the power of example and the strength of their character.